Welcome to another episode of I Can Do That. I'm David Lyle. Today we are talking metal. I want to take you through a whole lesson of metal tips and tricks. And so we have all kinds of stock available here. Everything from flat to angle to tube. We got some pipe, aluminum, and some copper. I want to show you how we're going to cut this with a few different tools and how to clamp it down to your work surface. Now, there's a few things that I want to show you about drilling and tapping and even cutting bolts so you don't have to run to the hardware store so often. And who knows the difference between these two files? Another indispensable tool in metalworking is the angle grinder. There's all kinds of different discs available for this. And so we're going to overview those, and then finally we'll get into the prep, safety, and what you need to know to make sure that you're doing metal cutting safely and with a little fun. So let's get started. There are a variety of metals out there that you can use for your projects and integrate into your woodworking projects. Let's just cover a few of the basics. There are ferrous metals and there are non-ferrous metals. Non-ferrous metals are non-magnetic, like copper and aluminum. The nice thing about working with aluminum is that many of your woodworking tools that you already have can cut this. For instance, I could cut this aluminum angle on this chop saw that has just a wood cutting blade. There's carbide teeth on here that can easily chomp through aluminum with no trouble. But once you move into ferrous metals like iron, you're going to need some specialized tools. And for that, you could use a variety of things. And so I just want to show you a couple of them. So one of the first tools that you're probably very familiar with is the trusty hacksaw. There's no shame in using this to make all of your cuts while working on metal. It might be a little slower, but you'll get the job done and it doesn't require any power. The next tool I want to show you that you might also be familiar with is the jigsaw. Now, you can use a regular wood cutting jigsaw machine, but you'll need a different blade. And so this is a really handy thing to have at your disposal. Right here is our wood cutting blade that's got a little toasty over time. But I picked up this pack of Bosch blades just to show you the difference between the different styles of blade. So I took this metal cutting blade out of here, and you can see that the teeth are significantly smaller and there's more of them per inch, and so you can see the different readings at the bottom of there. But as you look at the wood cutting blades, their teeth are much bigger and more aggressive. And so those are the jigsaw blades. Now let's move on to a couple of the more powerful metal cutting tools. One that you're going to want to pick up early on is an angle grinder. With this, there are many kinds of different discs and pads and things that you can use on here that will give you a lot of options while cutting metal. Right now, I have a metal cutoff wheel on here. You can see that it's a very thin blade that will let you make a very precise cut in here. And so the only thing prohibiting you from a perfect cut is yourself. So I just want to show you how this works really quick. And one of the things about an angle grinder is you always put it on your back because you don't know if that switch gets bumped and it's face down, it's going to walk and it's going to go everywhere, and that's dangerous. So while cutting metal, you definitely want eye protection and hearing protection because cutting metal is significantly louder than wood. And so you can see while you're cutting metal, you're going to be shooting sparks everywhere. So if you're in your wood shop and you're cutting metal like this, you need to be conscious of where those sparks are going. Either move outside or make sure you're in a contained area. So after you get done making a bunch of sparks, make sure that you kind of follow that smolder rule. Don't go back in the house for about 30 minutes to make sure none of those sparks have caught on any wood shavings or anything that's on your floor, and they're going to kind of eventually catch. Now, if you really want to step up your game, the cold cut metal chop saw is really a great tool. They're a lot of fun. They're fairly new to me. I just did one project with one, and I really enjoyed it over the angle grinder and that sort of thing. So basically, it's a chop saw like you're familiar with a regular miter saw, but you're going to have a blade that is ready to handle metal shavings in a way that a wood cutting blade just isn't. The geometry of the blade, the way it's shaped, the way the teeth are set, everything is set for metal cutting. Now, one of the things you need to know is that these are quite loud, so make sure you're using eye and ear protection. And I just want to demonstrate for you how well this works. So once you're clamped in tight, you just let it loose. It's really like a hot knife through butter, and it leaves a really clean edge for you. And you can see, I don't know if the light's reflecting for you like me, how those teeth got through there, and there's really no burr on here at all. And so that's nearly ready for just getting ready for paint and that sort of thing. One of the things that I've seen people get hung up by when they're working with metal is drilling. Now, I want to show you a couple tips and tricks about drilling. If you look at these drill bits, they are different. This one is a regular brad point wood drilling bit, and so you can see that there's actually an extra little bit of drill here on the very tip that helps you get an accurate hole when you're drilling in metal. When you're drilling in metal, though, you don't want that. You want a standard drill bit, just with the flat flutes up top, and they converge to a center point here. And when you're using these, there's something that you need to know. This drill bit will wander because of the flat that's at the top of this, so you have to use a center punch to make sure it stays in place. So when you're marking metal, it's always great to use a Sharpie. You can always clean it off with a solvent later. And with your center point, you just find your center there. And I'm trying to make sure I can see it on camera. And just give it a good whack. And that left enough of a detent there that your drill bit will be able to register there. The drill bit that I'm using is a number 7. And the reason I'm using a number 7 drill bit is because I'm going to show you how to tap this hole when I'm done. So with your drill bit, you just find that center punch hole, and you use the fastest speed you can while using a drill like this. Also, always wear your safety glasses. Some people would like to use some oil while drilling into metal, and we're not going to do that yet because I'll show you that when we get to the tapping stage. And if your bit is sharp, you'll start seeing shavings right away. And just make sure that you stay centered. And really just go to town. It will take longer than when you're working with wood, but it's okay. You're not doing something wrong. Just keep at it. And just like that, we're through this 1/8 inch steel. And you gotta be careful, like you don't wanna just swipe these and get metal chips into your hand. So you can give it a little blow. Now, let's take a look at this tap. This is a 1/4-20 tap. Something to think about, when you're using a tap, it has to be sized to your screw. And one of the ways that, if you were to toss these taps, like a set of taps into your bag and lose track of them, you can always check your tap to your screw by mating them like this, and you can see that the threads come together. So you'll know that you're using the right tap with your screw, and this is a tap holder. It has an adjustable collet here, which I've already tightened, but you just stick the tap in there, and then you're ready to go. And these large cutouts here on the tap will clear the chips, and you can see that the threads on them are progressive so that it can cut that thread into the metal. And so I am going to use a little bit of oil here. I'm just going to actually put it on here. And you don't need a lot. But one of the things to be conscious of when you're tapping is to stay straight. And once it starts to bite, and sorry to put my hand so in front of the way of the camera, you really don't want to cross thread it. So some of the best practices are to drive it until it gets a little tough and then back it out a little bit. And I don't think you're gonna be able to hear this on camera, but I just heard the chip break when I did that. So I'm gonna drive it a little more, and it's getting tough, so I'm gonna back it out, and the chip just broke again. And you can back it out a couple turns. Just make sure you feel for that thread, that you're not cross-threading it. And taps are brittle. They are hardened. They are harder than the steel that they're going in. And so if you really muscle down on it, you're going to break it. Taps break. It's a fact of life. So don't be too discouraged if it happens to you. And I'm trying to talk and do this at the same time. So I'm going to press on here. Okay, and so now I'm spinning freely, and so this hole is tapped. And it's, you kind of feel like you have a superpower once you learn how to tap, because you can basically do anything. And so now this 1/4-20 bolt will thread right in there, and you can only imagine the possibilities if you can tap anything. I could connect two pieces of metal together. I could connect a piece of wood to this piece of metal. Imagine a piece of wood sandwiched in here under the bolt. And what it's doing is it's just threading into that first wall of this rectangular tube. Oh, got some spider webs in there and burrs. And so really, you can do anything with this. So let me show you a couple other things. Let's say you had a bolt that was too long. While we're talking about metal cutting and tapping, and a case that comes up in my shop often is that I simply won't have the right length of bolt. And I'm here today to tell you that it's okay. You can make your own size bolt. So I've got one in the vise here, but this is a 1/4-20 1-inch bolt with just a flat top. And let's say I wanted to make this a 3/4-inch bolt. With my cutoff wheel on the angle grinder, you can do that. And let me just show you how this is done. I'm going to cut this, and then I'm going to file it so that the threads work again. And so first, let's cut it. I don't know if I actually took a 1/4 inch off, but one of the things you'll notice is that there's a burr on there after you're done using the cutoff wheel. And so sometimes, just to reestablish that thread, you'll have to hit it with a little bit of a chamfer, and that will sort of re-establish that thread. And let me just show this to you. I don't know if you're going to be able to see this on camera. But you can see where this thread starts on the bolt. And the important thing is that it has room to catch. And so right now, I've got a little bit of a burr in there. And so I imagine I'm probably going to have to file that off before this works again. We can go ahead and try it up here and see if it'll go in. Oh, and actually, it's already gone in. So that burr was not actually in the way. But sometimes it is, and your experience may vary. But really, all you'd have to do, if that was an issue, is hit it with this file until there is a clean place where that thread starts. And so with that, you can not only tap a hole, but you can create any size screw that you need for any kind of situation. Let's talk files for a second. Files are not all created equal. They're very handy for metalworking because you can chamfer edges, remove burrs, and generally shape your work in a very controlled way. I have two files here that are for metalworking, but I just want to show you a common woodworking file for a second. This side is rounded and we have a flat side over here. The teeth are very large, and in a sense, because they're so large in the way that this is manufactured, they're kind of fragile. They're kind of like little talons sticking up that will eat away at the wood. On a metal file, you'll notice that they're usually much finer. These two are different. This one has only a single series of lines on it. This makes it for finer work, whereas this file, which has a cross hatch pattern, there's some going this way and some going this way, and this one will give you a more aggressive removal of material. So you can use these to take burrs off like this, and for something like this, where I have this long burr from the cutting process, I would simply strike it in one direction and it will knock it off. I have found that having a little momentum when you hit the piece helps sometimes. It would be helpful even more if this was clamped in the vise that I'm using it on top of. But I'm just trying to show you this real quick. And so that will remove the burr, give it a slight chamfer, and remove any sharp edges that are actually kind of dangerous because they'll cut you. So, all right, now let's move on. The angle grinder, like I said earlier, is an indispensable tool when working with metal. There's just so much you can do with it. I just want to dive a little deeper into the things that you can do with it. A couple of standard features is that they almost always come with a handle, which you can position on the left side or the right. But some of the nice features are a spindle lock. This will lock that spindle while you're changing it out, or the pad out. And a really nice one, which is not what you really have to pay attention for when you're shopping, is this little button right here. This lets you move the guard to any one of these positive detents whenever you want without a tool. And I find that really useful depending on the situation that I'm grinding in, that as this disc rotates in a clockwise manner, it's going to shoot sparks off the top of this wheel. And so if I can position it so it's not shooting those sparks into something that I don't want sparks shot into, that's really handy. So in here, I have a hard grinding wheel. You'll notice that it's a little thicker than the cutoff wheel. And that is because this is a medium that actually is consumed as you use it on welds or chamfers or things like that. A couple of the wheels that I wanted to show you are this flap disc. This is a 40 grit, but this is actually little pieces of sandpaper that are held into the top of this wheel. And so I have found that this particular one tends to wear down pretty quick, but I know a lot of people use these pretty regularly because you can really hog out a lot of material quickly with them. And you can get them in finer grits too, which lets you get a nicer finish. And then things like this wire wheel are really handy because you can use this when you're working with like reclaimed wood or surfaces that just need the big stuff knocked off them. And so I think I probably use these more in woodworking than metalworking, but I wanted to show that to you as well. There's lots of other options out there, but I wanted to show you how I go about using this hard grinding wheel because I find it, I think, most useful for my grinding activities over the grinding disc or other kinds of wheels. And so I'm going to put on my eye protection and my hearing protection. And I just want to show you how I'm going to go about this. And before I turn it on, I just want to show you that I have the guard sort of parallel with me, so nothing is going to come back at me from the wheel. But as I attack this surface, you really need to be conscious of how much pressure you are applying because this wheel is turning very fast. And so it will kind of dig and want to move, and you really need to have a firm control on the machine. That's why the two handles lets you kind of triangulate this pressure really precisely. And so I'm going to put my hearing protection on now and show you how I go about this. And you can really just work your way slowly. And so you can use multiple passes at a steady rate to create a chamfer that's really quite nice. And like I said earlier, always put your angle grinder on its back when you're done with it, just in case it decides to take off and someone plugs it in or something weird happens. Also, work holding. If you really get into work holding or metalworking, you'll want to get a metal table. But if you're working on a woodworking bench like this, just make sure that you have appropriate clamping capabilities, which this armor clamp has been great on this bench. It really, I mean, it's rock solid now. Or you might want to hang it off the bench so that you're clearing any chips straight onto the floor rather than your bench, and that sort of thing. So I'm going to clean up these welds. This is from a flux core welder that I did a while back, and I just hadn't gotten to this set of legs. And so I just want to show you how I'm going to progressively take this away. And I remember why I didn't use this leg before. When I was welding, I actually didn't make a complete fill on this weld, and I ended up using a different set of legs for a video. But anyway, what I hope you noticed is that as I came across this weld, I was really concentrating on keeping that grinding wheel level above it. And so I wasn't kind of sideways and then accidentally digging into the sides of this material when I didn't intend to. And so I just progressively almost planed this down for you woodworkers out there until I was flush, and then you can see that I kind of feathered it in a little bit. I would not call this done. I really would want this weld filled in, and so I might actually hit it with another pass just so that it doesn't have any gaps, you know, when you go to paint it. And then you kind of feather it in, and the idea is that you really don't want to eat too much material away, because when you paint this, if you grind it correctly, it's going to look like one flat surface. You have completely conjoined these, you have blended them in, and that's the goal. So you really don't want to eat into the material inappropriately. So, all right, let's move on. One of the last things I want to talk about is cleaning metal. Look at my hands. After handling this metal just a little bit over the course of the shoot, there's black all over my hands. And the reason is because when this comes from the mill where it's manufactured, it typically will get quite messy just from the production process. And so there's a couple options. I like to use mineral spirits to clean up my metal. And you know, sometimes it's worth doing this at the front end of things, just so as you work your pieces to length and deburr them, that they're clean and you can start handling them as much as you want. But just put this on a paper towel, and I really suggest using a consumable here because it's gonna just get filthy. A little bit of mineral spirits on a rag will degrease this, and I would just keep at it until it's all clean. And you'll notice that this makes working with metal much more enjoyable. It's a dirty process just to get it clean, and I do enjoy using the low odor mineral spirits. Otherwise, you really need to be conscious of ventilation, which even with this you do. But that applies to tube stock. If you're working on any projects with piping, black pipe, you'll notice right off the bat that you're going to need to clean this before anything else. Just handling it, it's pretty dirty. This pre-cut section, when I got it from the store, was fairly clean. But you'd be surprised when you start rubbing a little bit of mineral spirits on here, just how dirty it is. And this will really affect the way that paint adheres to it. And so you need to get all that grease and all that oil off of there. And it's going to clean up quite nicely. And you got to clean up your flanges too. And I don't know if you know this, but if you plan on doing a pipe project like this, The ends here, this thread, since we've already talked about threads in this video, I'll just get into it a little bit now. You'll notice that this thread is tapered, actually changing the diameter of the pipe down a little bit as it goes through. So when you screw these on, like these flanges or connectors or elbows or whatever you're doing, it's not going to thread all the way. And I know for some of you that's going to be irritating if you're not accustomed to working with black pipe, but just a small fact for you. And if you're working with angle, same thing. I would really just try to clean this stuff up before you paint. Speaking of paint, let me show you a couple options here. If you are working with aluminum, mostly aluminum, you'll want to use a self-etching primer. You can use this on other things, but there's actually something in here that will cause a chemical reaction to allow this primer to adhere to the slick aluminum better than regular primer. But often, if I'm just painting something like a pair of chunky legs like this for a piece of furniture that's going to be inside, and I'm not overly concerned about, I will go straight to a paint primer combo like this. It's given me really nice results over the years, so I would check something like that out. So with that, I hope you learned something about working with metal. There's a lot to know, and some of it can be kind of intimidating because people who work with metal, they are tough, and you go into these scary metal yards, and just know that it's not that complicated. And if you have the right tools and the right products, you'll make it out being a better maker. And so I hope this was encouraging to you. And if you have any suggestions about metal tips and tricks that we could use in an additional episode, leave some comments down in the description. And I hope you go and make something out of metal. I'm David Lyle with Popular Woodworking, and we'll see you next time.